welcome back to the Garden with Joe and Holly radio show. Thank you for being with us today. Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in our guest.
As one of the country's most recognized and trusted personalities in gardening and green living, that passion for living a greener life is evident to a nationwide audience who watches Joe Lample in his current role as creator, executive producer, and host of the multiple award-winning PBS series, Growing a Greener World, which now has a new feature exclusively online. He is also an author, blogger, and more. Welcome to the program, Joe.
Hey, Holly. Hey, Joey. Nice to be here.
Well, thank you for making a return to the program. We're always happy when you're able to etch out a little time for us on our show. And I'll start with this. Many people have trees on their property, and can tree trimming still be done now as we get into the warmer portions of the year, or have we missed that window and we're going to do more damage if we say, I really want that limb and I cut it?
Yeah, you can do it now. The worst time to prune a tree is when it's we're coming into fall and things are starting to go dormant. But if you were to make a cut then, and then you had some warm weather come into play, it might trick the tree into thinking that it's time to, put on new growth, as it happens as we come into spring. But in the fall, it really is the weather that's coming is colder. And so that new growth can be nipped back, and that can cause open wounds and opportunities for improper healing or pest and disease issues that may work their way in. So there's far greater risk to a tree if you were to prune late in the season than at this time of year when everything is really gearing up for new growth. It's fine to make a cut now, whether you're making a healing cut or you're taking out a diseased limb or you're trying to reduce the size. Now, just keep in mind, when you make a cut, oftentimes that does stimulate new growth. So if that's what you want, this would be a great time to make that cut. So just be mindful of what the purpose behind why you're making that cut as you think about the timing of it.
What is a common mistake, or one of the most frequent mistakes you see people make when trimming trees?
I don't have to think about this one for a second before I answer it. It's tree topping. It's butchering the tree, basically. Now, done properly, I mean, it's been an ancient practice in Europe forever with pollarding and other ways to cut a tree. But here, we don't do it the right way. Not that there really is a right way. We just do it the wrong way. And we just take a beautiful hardwood tree and we give it a haircut right across, straight across. And then what happens is that tree just realizes it lost a massive amount of its biomass, which produces the photosynthesis to provide the energy from the sun to feed itself. And now it's gone. So the first things that it does, it sends out these suckers or these water sprouts that are weakly joined to the main part of the tree, but they have to grow rapidly and produce new leaves and branches in order to send out new opportunities to photosynthesize. And the funny thing, the irony is that people oftentimes top their trees because they think it's a way to improve the safety of a potential branch that may someday fall on their house because Johnny Chainsaw came around in his pickup truck and said, Mrs. Jones, it's time to top your trees because you don't want those falling on your house, do you? So there's that fear. But what happens is when Johnny Chainsaw makes that cut and those water sprouts come up, those are so weakly attached to the main part of the branch, they're nowhere near as strong as the original branches. And now they are more likely to fall off in a windstorm or something like that and potentially land on the house. So you've got a recurring problem that probably causes the tree to get topped every year to remove those suckers. And then within about 3 years, the tree is typically dead because trees are not made to be topped like that. And they can't sustain themselves with that kind of abuse year after year. And within a few years, they give up the goat and they're done. And it's a pitiful sight to see a top tree that within a few years goes from this beautiful, massive oak tree, for example, to a dead stump in the yard. And Joey, if I had a nickel for every time I saw that, I've seen that, I'd be a wealthy man right now. But, the International Association of Arboriculture will tell you, you do not top a tree. It's wrong in every way. Now, this is not to be confused with removing a branch that is in risk of falling, or is dead or diseased or dying or crossing or whatever. I mean, there are times where you do that, but that's appropriate. Topping just because you're afraid that someday a branch may fall, or you want to reduce the size of a mature tree because it's too big. Well, it's a shame that you planted a tree that was too big for that area anyway. Um, so you would do proper thinning cuts, or you hire or consult with an arborist, pay them $100 for their time for an hour to give you good information, and then follow the advice of the arborist rather than, Johnny Chainsaw, who's showing up and just giving you this recommendation because they get paid when they make cuts on your tree. That's not the same
Who
thing.
may not be insured or licensed and just has a magnet
Yeah.
on the side of their truck.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. True.
So we talk about killer compost every time you come on the show, but I feel it's always worth repeating. What is
Yeah.
killer compost? And you had to deal with it personally. What happened?
Yeah. So as gardeners, we have this love affair, as we should, with good aged rotted manure, because it's so rich in nutrients and nitrogen, and it's great for the garden. And it's always been a wonderful input into our soil. But when these chemical companies came along and developed these molecules that are so persistent in their chemical applications that farmers put down on their fields to kill weeds, and they're selective, the product that these farmers are using on their, like, hay fields, for example, kill the broadleaf weeds, so that when they're harvesting their hay, it's nice and clean because the broadleaf weeds are dead, but the grass is alive. It doesn't kill the grass. So understandably, as a farmer, this could be a good thing for your product. You're able to deliver a clean product that has been sprayed with an herbicide that actually is okay when horses eat something that's been sprayed with this herbicide, because the molecule will not and does not break down inside the horse's digestive system, so there's no harm to the horse. But that is the problem, because that molecule that kills the broadleaf weeds is still completely intact. It has 100% efficacy, which is the term applied to how effective it is, years or many, many months after it's been consumed by the horse, made it out the back end. The manure has been rotted and aged and sitting in a compost pile for a few years, and then a gardener comes along and gets it and puts it in their garden, only to find that because that molecule that was from that herbicide that was put on the field is still viable as an herbicide, it's now in the soil of the gardener, and it can kill many of the plants that a vegetable gardener especially would be having in their garden. It doesn't kill everything, but it's very, very destructive to many common edible plants that we put in our garden. So the scary thing about it is it can do damage to your plants in the single digit parts per billion. And so it doesn't take much of that stuff to really mess up your soil for a few years, as it did mine.
And how did you revert back to, or how did you fix the problem once you saw what was going on?
Yeah, there's really no fixing to that problem. You go on a company's website, like, I can't remember the manufacturers right now, so I'm not going to name a name, but most of them. But you go on their websites and you look up this stuff, and you find out that the only way to neutralize it or make it non-lethal is time, exposing it to UV light, air, and water. So in my case, the way I maybe accelerated it by about a year from what it would have been had I not done these things was I continued to turn my soil over and over and over through the year. I wasn't planting anything into it because there was no point in that. And then the exposure to the air and light and UV, I think probably allowed me to rectify the soil about a year faster than what on average it takes, which is about 5 years.
Understand. What is the biggest garden myth you see people do regardless, and regardless even they may know it's not really working, and why is it so wrong that they're doing it?
There's a lot of myths out there, and I was thinking about what's one that I can share that's not so offensive or controversial, but is science-based. And so I'm just going to go, as we're coming into the summer, we're coming into planting our holes for our tomato plants. A lot of us get blossom end rot, and that is that nasty blackish brownish rotting area at the flower, the bottom end of our tomatoes as they're coming out of the stem of the flower. And you look at that and you go, what is that? And that's blossom end rot. And it's a calcium deficiency in the soil, sort of. The reason why you get this blossom end rot is because the calcium isn't making it up into the plant sufficiently. And that's usually because of inconsistent watering. But forever, the anecdotal recommendation has been, just take your eggshells and throw them into the hole before you plant your tomato, and that'll cure blossom end rot. And in about 5 years' time, those eggshells that you threw in there 5 years prior are now breaking down enough to actually be taken up in the soil, attached to water into the roots, and that helps with some calcium. But there's generally enough calcium in the soil anyway, with or without eggshells, that as long as we are more consistent with how we water, that's how we manage to avoid blossom end rot. It's not throwing eggshells that don't break down or even become available to the plant for 5 years that's solving that problem in year 1, 2, 3, or 4. But if you've been doing this for 5 years or so and you're not getting blossom end rot now, that's probably because of the eggshells that you threw in there 5 years ago. But they literally don't break down. You could dig back into that hole a few years after you put them in there, and those eggshells would be about exactly like they looked when you put them in there.
Right.
Yeah. So that's one. I just hear it continue to be recommended with no clarification that this is not a fix in the first year. And I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying it doesn't work as it's purported to work that quickly. It takes years for it to be available to the plant. It's not a same year thing.
Definitely. So what is one thing that you would redo in your garden, regardless of time or anything, and why would you redo that?
What I would do is I would plant more flowers in my garden sooner. And the reason I say that is we finally got around last year to putting in dedicated beds in our raised bed vegetable garden. Inside the fence line, we had room to put in more raised beds, and we did that exclusively for flowers, because we too want to attract more beneficial insects and predatory insects and have more biodiversity in our garden to help make everything healthy and have a better ecosystem. And, I've got a lot of native flowers around the property, but not right in the garden until last year. And I got to tell you guys, it was like a different world in there after we made a conscientious effort to get those beds built and fill it with flowers. Not only was it beautiful for us to watch every day, but to see the difference from the prior year to last year in the amount of life that was in the garden, and the very minimal amount of pest pressure that we even had in the garden last year. I got to say, my garden's been pretty good overall for pests. Just best practices for organic management does that. But last year was the best year ever for that. And it's just a joy. And it was a different feeling, a different look, a more relaxed look. But just to see the noticeable difference of all the activity from the insects and the wildlife that was coming into the garden, along with a reduction in pest pressure, was absolutely noticeable. So it felt really good. And I was like, why did it take me so long? But I'm so food focused and thinking about the crops that I'm growing that I just never stopped long enough. And to the credit of my horticulture manager and farm manager, Toby, she's really good with flowers. And we just decided, now that you're here, I want a lot of your time to be spent really building up the presence of the flowers in the garden. So I am so thankful we finally got around to doing that. And I just never imagined going back and not giving the flowers their due to share that space, not only in the perimeter, but also in the raised beds right there with some of the food crops. That was really cool to do that too.
Understand. In the last 5 years, what would you say has been your best crop in the garden, and do you have an explanation of why it was so good?
I'm gonna put myself in the same camp with anybody else that can do the same thing I did. And that is the cool season crops to me are they're just automatically easier because they're not as sensitive to hot, we do them in the cooler weather, and the cooler weather is more conducive to plant growth for many of the plants that we put in our fall garden, the edibles, that is. So I'm going to say spinach and kale because they're leafy crops. We're not depending on them to put on a big, cauliflower head or broccoli head or Brussels sprouts up the stalk, hopefully by Thanksgiving, which never down here happens. But I have watched my spinach and my kale go through. Now, granted, I live in Atlanta, not, where you guys are in Wisconsin, but it overwinters so beautifully that you don't have to worry about it dying because it's cold outside, and it gets better when it's cold. It gets sweeter, and it's not susceptible to pest pressure until the following year when you're coming into late spring and the aphids decide that they want to eat some of your kale. Until then, it's the most carefree, hands-off plants I grow in my garden. And it's not really anything that special that I do. It's something anybody could do. But we need some of those rewards. We work so hard in our gardens and fight those fights every day. We have to give credit and appreciation to those plants that really cut us a break. And they're delicious too. And so I will always grow kale and spinach in my garden because of their forgiveness under all kinds of pressure. They're just amazing, and they're delicious and healthy. So that's my answer.
Fantastic. Well, we really enjoyed having you on the program and all of your great information. How can people find out more about you and your program?
Yeah. Well, joegardner.com would be the hub for the links out to everything else. That's the website, and lots of podcast links and articles to everything we've posted. And then YouTube, as you mentioned in the tease, the Growing a Greener World television series, which has 12 series over 12 years and over 200 episodes, it is now going to be available in its entirety, all 12 seasons, all episodes we've ever done, our entire library, on our YouTube channel, GGW TV. And that started today with season 1. We rolled out the entire season 1, which is 26 episodes today. Wow. And we'll continue to do that each week until we get all 12 seasons rolled out.
Well, Joe, we greatly appreciate the time and your information, and not only educating Holly, myself, but all of our listeners. We thank you for that.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Absolutely.